All right, I'm glad you're still with me. I hope you're making good progress with your situation analysis. In today's video, I'm going to share the data sources section, and we're going to work together on putting together, identifying what your data sources are, reviewing and describing each one and what that actually means. Now, if you go to the rubric, you can skip down to page, let's see. So yeah, page 5 of the rubric has the section on data sources. And here, again, if you're short on time, refer to the guidance that is in the Word template itself. So what does it say? Let's look at that together. Briefly describe at least 2 appropriate data sources you are using and why they are the best ones to answer your question. Review and describe each data source, including their limitations. Now, this does not have to be a long section because you probably don't have a dozen data sources, all right? But we do need at least 2, and I'm going to explain why. And you can actually find the explanation in the rubric. So let's look at this criterion of the rubric, as we call it, on data sources. So first of all, we can look at the ratings. Remember, your peer reviewers will be using these ratings as they strive to give you constructive feedback to help you improve your situation analysis. So obviously, if there's no or only one data source identified, that's a 0. So think about it. If all you have is administrative coverage, to take a kind of caricatural example, if you only have one source of data, then that is automatically a 0. Why? Because we believe that to produce a good situation analysis requires at least 2 things: more than one source of data, and then the root cause analysis, not stopping at the first level of what you think the cause of the situation is, but looking at the underlying causes. So this is an important one in the data sources. Now, what if you only have one data source? I would suggest that your second data source is your own personal experience. And I've referred to this in the video about my situation, encouraging you to share what you know that no one else can know because they do not work there every day, while recognizing the limitations of that. And again, so personal experience is necessary, I would say, but not sufficient. But any data source is going to be potentially useful, but not sufficient. And then what do we have for the 4? So we have excellent identification and comparison of appropriate data sources to answer the question. So first of all, what you need to do in this section is to briefly summarize what the data sources are that you are using for your analysis, and then why they are the best ones to answer your question. So this needs to include recognizing limitations, but if you're going to say, well, I'm using DHIS2 data, why is that an appropriate data source? You need to tell us. Don't just tell us, I have this available. This is not about what is available to you. And then where I would challenge you is to think beyond the easily available national level data that you may have access to, and to look at things that you can do in your local area, things that you may be able to count, access registers, access other kinds of data records, and use that locally available data as a data source, and describe it as such in your situation analysis. Now, to go back to the rubric, you can see here, use your question to guide your search for data. So indeed, it's not just about saying, I have all these things. It's really, what do I need to know to be able to answer my question? And then once that is clear, ask yourself, what data sources can I use to know what I need to know? And this is why you should review your question before you look for any data. You may know sort of what you have on the shelf, but the point of this section is not to show us everything you have on the shelf. It is to tell us what you have on the shelf, from what you have available, from what you have access to. What are you going to pull in that can help you with your situation analysis? So we encourage you to use sources that are locally available, that you already have access to. And this can be qualitative as well as quantitative data. So qualitative data may be speaking with your colleagues. Something as simple as that can be a source of information, which you would then reference as an important data source. You say, well, I spoke with all of the district medical officers in my area of intervention. And this is one of my data sources to understand my situation in relation to my challenge and to help me answer the question I want to answer. Next, I say, well, I want to find at least 2 appropriate data sources. Why do we require you to have at least 2? There's a lot of evidence that suggests that any single data source, even a reliable one, is going to be incomplete when it comes to tackling the underlying causes of a challenge, of a situation. So we encourage you to compare the data from multiple sources. You can even use a technique called triangulation, but you can also keep it simple and just say, okay, well, I'm looking at these sources of data. Where do they contradict each other? Where is one known not to be reliable, and I can fill in the blanks with other data? And again, the reliance on personal experience is legitimate up to a point, up to the point where you need to first clearly check your assumptions. Maybe you are making assumptions and that is actually contributing to the problem. You think that things are a particular way because that's what everybody thinks, but actually, what if that assumption is wrong? What if and in fact, as long as you do not question that assumption, you are unlikely to make the right diagnosis. Situation analysis, in a way, is about that, making that an accurate diagnosis of the situation. So when you review and describe each data source, you want to describe the geographic area, time period, the main focus of each data source, describe anything else others need to know about your data sources to understand if they're appropriate for your analysis. Review each data source, define problems like completeness, timeliness, consistency, reliability, and if you decide that one data source is actually more useful than another, then you need to explain why in your in that section in part 3 on data sources. Now, there are a number of potential data sources to consider. So there's standard EPI core information. So this can be your comprehensive multi-year plan, the CMYP, or now the National Immunization Strategy, administrative reports, equity assessments, coverage surveys, micro plans, annual work plans, EPI reviews. Now, if you work at the facility level, the data sources could include immunization registers, tally sheets, community health worker registers, vaccine stock registers, etc. Locally available documents and reports about immunization plans, strategies, coverage, incidents of VPDs, of vaccine preventable diseases, and program data. And then public data sources. So on the WHO website, you'll find the WHO UNICEF estimates of national immunization coverage. The WHO Immunization has its own data portal. We can show you how to access that if you do not find it yourself. Community feedback, and that can be an important part. If you're able to, if you have done this at the situation analysis stage, is to do key informant interviews or surveys. That can be an important source of qualitative data and help ensure that services really meet community needs. Now, any other sources, anything else that includes information about immunization where you work, as well as other things about your local context that may be important to understand, to correctly do that, to build a correct, an accurate picture of what is the situation in relation to your challenge in order to be able to answer the question that you're asking. Now, in some cases where data is not available, you can look at data from a different place of a similar setting. And if you do that, you're going to have to justify why it's appropriate to draw the comparison. Now, when it gets to the peer review stage, your reviewers will be asking a number of questions that you can see here. Is there enough information to tell if the data sources identified are the best ones to answer the question? So as you work, you're going to want to check your data sources. Are they, do you clearly explain why these are the best available data sources, why and how they're actually helping you to answer your question and to correctly analyze your situation? So that's, there are some additional questions. A clear distinction between personal opinion and documented evidence. So the type of data source, if you say that your personal experience, your personal observations are an important data source, and it is likely that is the case because what you know matters, and that is part of what this exercise is about. But having said that, make sure that you are clear about the limitations as well. So I hope this will be helpful for you to be able to really describe the data sources you're using, why they're the best ones to answer your question, and then to describe each data source. Don't neglect the limitations of each one and relate it back to the question you're trying to answer, the challenge that you ultimately want to tackle. This is not an academic exercise. I will repeat this every time. Ask yourself, this being clear about my data sources, that's going to help you. Tell yourself that is going to help you if you're going to make the case based on your situation analysis to take action. You'll be able to say, here are my data sources. They are written out. You can check them. You can verify them. You can go to them. You will see this will help you demonstrate that your analysis is sound and that it's grounded in specific data sources. The sources may not be perfect, but acknowledging it, recognizing the limitations is key to making sure that you build a useful picture, a useful situation analysis with known limitations, as well as correctly identifying where are the strengths of that analysis and what it can actually enable you to do.